The rain came down like bullets on the cabin roof. Nora Hastings stood by the window, a Colt revolver trembling in her hands. The weight of it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Outside, through the sheets of water streaming down the glass, she could see them coming. 5 shapes moving through the darkness. 5 men who wanted her dead. Blood ran down Wyatt Thornhill's face from the wash above his left eye. He stood beside her, Winchester rifle pressed against his shoulder, every muscle in his body coiled tight as fence wire. His jaw was set in that way she'd come to recognize over the past 3 months. The way that meant he'd made a decision, and God himself couldn't change it. From somewhere above them, from the loft where he'd positioned himself an hour ago, Cal Brennan's voice cut through the drumming rain. "Wyatt, they're pouring kerosene on the north wall." The smell hit her then, sharp and chemical. The smell of endings. Vincent's voice rose above the storm, slurred with whiskey and rage, the same voice that had haunted her nightmares for 4 years. "Nora, I know you're in there. Give me what you took and I'll make it quick." Her fingers tightened on the grip of the gun. The ledger pressed against her ribs where she tied it inside her dress. Everything it contained. Every life Vincent's father had destroyed. Every bribe. Every murder. 15 years of crimes written in Silas Dalton's own hand, including Margaret. Always Margaret. "You still trust me?" Wyatt asked without looking at her. His voice was steady, impossibly steady for a man who might die in the next 5 minutes. "Yes." "Then hold on to that ledger and stay alive." He moved toward the door. The Winchester looked like an extension of his arm, like something grown from his body during all those years of war. She wanted to tell him to stop. Wanted to tell him she wasn't worth dying for. Wanted to tell him that no one had ever chosen to stand in front of her instead of behind her, and the weight of that kindness was crushing her chest. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. The door opened. Rain poured in. Wyatt stepped out into the storm, and the night exploded with gunfire. Then everything went black. A man's voice, older now, weathered by decades, spoke through the darkness. "People ask what makes a man. They think it's about what you own. How much land, how many cattle, how many notches on your gun. They're wrong. A man is measured by the promises he keeps when the world tells him to break them. And that night in the rain with 5 men coming to kill us, I learned something I should have known all along. Sometimes the only way to keep breathing is to stand between the bullet and the person you love." 3 months earlier, the Montana summer hung heavy over Millbrook Station. Wyatt Thornhill stood on the platform with a letter in his pocket, worn soft from reading. He'd gotten it 2 months ago. Read it maybe 50 times since then. Each time he tried to imagine the woman who'd written it. Tried to picture what desperation looked like when it learned to write in careful, measured sentences. The letter sat folded against his chest now, and he could recite it without looking. "Dear Mr. Thornhill, my name is Nora Brennan. I am 28 years old. I know how to care for the sick cook and manage a household. I am not beautiful, but I am hardworking and honest. I am looking for a decent man to start over with. If you are that man, please send a train ticket. Respectfully, Nora Brennan." No false promises. No poetry about love or destiny. Just facts laid out clean as fence posts. That's what had made him choose her letter from the dozen he had received. The honesty in it. The way it didn't try to sell him something he didn't want to buy. The train whistle cut through the afternoon heat. A long moan first, then sharper as the locomotive rounded the bend. Black smoke against the pale sky. The smell of coal and hot metal. Wyatt's hand moved to his pocket, touched the letter one more time, then dropped to his side. His other hand adjusted the hat he'd bought new for the occasion. A foolish expense. But a man meeting his future wife ought to look like he gave a damn. The train shuddered to a stop. Steam billowed across the platform, turning the world white and wet. When it cleared, passengers began stepping down. A drummer in a check suit. An old woman with a carpet bag. 2 ranchers who headed straight for the saloon. No one who looked like they belonged to that letter. Wyatt waited. The platform emptied. The conductor checked his watch and shouted something to the engineer. The afternoon sun beat down on Wyatt's shoulders, and he felt every one of his 39 years pressing against his spine. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd seen the photograph he'd sent, the one that showed too much gray at his temples and too many hard years around his eyes, and decided a mail-order bride could do better than a Montana rancher, with more past than future. He turned to leave. Then he heard it, a single footstep on the metal stairs of the last car. Hesitant, almost silent, the kind of step a person makes when they're not sure they want to arrive. Wyatt turned back. A woman stood at the bottom of the steps and she looked nothing like he'd imagined. She was thin in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than natural build. Her dress was gray serviceable, hanging from her shoulders like it belonged to someone else. Someone who'd eaten more. Someone who'd slept without one eye open. Her hair was brown, pulled back severely, and she'd arranged it to fall forward on the left side, covering something. She held a small valise in both hands, pressed against her stomach, like someone might try to take it. Her eyes found his, gray-blue, the color of storm clouds gathering over the mountains before the rain comes. In those eyes, Wyatt saw something he recognized from the war. Not fear exactly, something deeper. The kind of wariness that lives in your bones so long you forget it's not a normal part of being alive. Mr. Thornhill, her voice was barely above a whisper, like speaking his name out loud might summon something she'd been running from. Mrs. Brennan. She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. Her eyes said that wasn't her name. Her eyes said she was sorry. Her eyes said, please don't send me back. Wyatt didn't know any of this yet, not consciously, but something in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through Gettysburg and a dozen range wars after that instinct, said this woman was in trouble deeper than any mail-order bride advertisement could explain. He moved toward the valise, meaning to take it, standard courtesy, but when his hand came near hers, she flinched. A small movement quickly hidden, the kind of flinch you develop when you've been hit too many times, when your body learns that hands bring pain before your mind can tell it otherwise. Wyatt stopped, pulled his hand back, gave her space. I won't hurt you, he said quietly. That's the first thing you need to know about me. She stared at him. The afternoon sun cut across her face and he saw it then. The faint shadow of a bruise under the powder on her cheekbone. Old but not healed. The way her left hand held the valise handle at an odd angle like fingers that had been broken and set wrong. Every man says that, she said, until they don't. Then don't believe in my words. Watch what I do. He picked up his own bag, the one with supplies from town, and walked toward the wagon without looking back, giving her the choice. Stay or go. Come or run. Her decision. Behind him, after a long moment, he heard footsteps. Soft, careful, maintaining exactly 3 steps of distance. She followed him to the wagon. When he offered his hand to help her up, she looked at it for a long time, studying it like a contract with small print. Then she pulled herself up using the wheel spoke instead, her damaged hand making the climb awkward but manageable. She sat on the far edge of the bench, as far from him as the seat allowed. Her body angled slightly toward the outside, toward escape. They rode in silence for the first mile. The road wound through sage and grassland, climbing gradually toward the valley where Wyatt's ranch sat in the shadow of the Rockies. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white even in July. Big sky country, the kind of land that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Wyatt glanced at his passenger. She wasn't looking at the mountains, she was looking behind them, watching the road they'd come from. Beautiful country, he offered. She turned forward, nodded without seeing anything. Then she asked a question that made every hair on Wyatt's arm stand up. Does anyone know I'm coming here? He looked at her. Her face was turned slightly away, that curtain of hair hiding whatever she didn't want him to see, but her hands had tightened on the edge of the seat until her knuckles went white. Cal Brennan knows. He's my ranch hand. Closest thing to family I got left. Other than that, I don't broadcast my personal business. Something in her shoulders loosened, just barely, like a rope that had been pulled to breaking finally given an inch of slack. Good, she said quietly. That's good. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view. It wasn't much, and Wyatt knew it. A cabin he'd built with his father back in 1868 before the old man died of pneumonia that first winter. A barn that leaned slightly east but held firm. A corral with 4 horses, outbuildings for storage, and the bunkhouse where he and Cal slept. But the land was something. 180 acres of meadow and timber backed up against the mountains with a creek running through it that never went dry. On clear mornings, you could see 50 miles in every direction. Wyatt had chosen this place because it felt like the edge of the world. A place where a man could disappear if he wanted to. Disappear from the memories of war. Disappear from the ghost of his dead wife and daughter. Disappear from everything that hurt too much to carry. He hadn't considered until this moment that a woman might want to disappear too. A man waited on the porch, red-haired with a face weathered by sun and scarred from old fights. Callum Brennan. Cal to everyone who knew him. Irish immigrant who'd saved Wyatt's life at Gettysburg and somehow ended up following him all the way to Montana. This would be the new Mrs. Thornhill then, Cal said, his accent thick as morning fog. Nora startled at his voice. Her hand moved to something in her pocket knife, maybe, or small pistol, then relaxed when she saw he wasn't moving toward her. I'm Cal Brennan, friend of Wyatt's. We fought together in the war. Been working this ranch with him ever since, for Mornaz. He didn't offer his hand, didn't step off the porch, just nodded, giving her space the way Wyatt had. Someone hurt you bad, Cal said simply. I can see it plain, but here nobody gets to do that. Not to you, not to anybody. Nora looked at Cal, then at Wyatt, then at the simple cabin with its solid door and clean windows. The first safe place she'd seen in 4 years. Thank you, she whispered. Wyatt showed her inside. The cabin smelled of pine soap and fresh air. He'd spent 3 days scrubbing it before her arrival. Swept the floors, washed the windows, put wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, then felt foolish and threw them out, then picked new ones and put them back. This is the kitchen, he said, suddenly aware of how bare it all looked, how little he had to offer. Sitting room there by the fireplace. And the back bedroom, that one's yours. He opened the door to show her, the room where Catherine had died, where he'd held her hand through 3 days of fever while scarlet fever took her piece by piece, where he'd sat for hours after they buried her, unable to make himself change anything. But he'd changed it for Nora, put clean sheets on the bed, set out fresh towels, made sure the window opened easily for air or escape, whichever she needed. This is your room, he said again. I'll be sleeping in the bunkhouse with Cal, however long you need. Could be weeks, could be months, could be forever. That's up to you. She stepped inside, looked around. Her eyes went to the window, first escape route, then to the bed, then to the door. There's a lock, Wyatt said. He held up a key. Only one, yours. I don't have a copy. Nora took the key. Her hand shook so badly the metal rattled. Why, she asked. Why would you sleep in the bunkhouse? This is your home. Because a locked door between us is worth more than any promise I could make. And I figure a woman who's been hurt bad enough to fake her name and run this far deserves the chance to feel safe before she's asked to trust. She stared at him, her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something. Then it closed. She nodded once, turned away. Wyatt pulled the door shut and walked out to the bunkhouse. The night was cool for July. Stars spread across the sky like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. Wyatt sat on the bunkhouse steps and thought about Catherine, about how she used to sit on those same steps mending his shirts by lamplight, about how her voice had sounded when she laughed, about how quickly scarlet fever had taken her and Ruth, both leaving him alone in a house that suddenly felt like a tomb. From the cabin through the thin walls in the summer air, he heard something that broke him open like an axe through dry wood. She was crying, not loud, not the kind of crying that wants to be heard, the kind that tries to stay hidden, muffled against a pillow or a fist or a folded arm, the kind of crying a person learns when they've been punished for making noise, when they've been told so many times that their pain is an inconvenience that they start believing it and cry anyway because the body knows what the mind refuses to accept. Wyatt sat in the dark and listened. Every instinct told him to go to her, to knock on her door and tell her she was safe now, that whatever had happened was over, that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. But he didn't move because he understood something about fear that most people never learn. You can't talk someone out of it, can't fix it with words or promises or good intentions. Fear that deep doesn't respond to what people say. It responds only to what they do. Over time, consistently, without expectation of anything in return. So Wyatt did the only thing he knew how to do. He got up quietly, walked to the well, pumped water until it ran cold and clear, heated it on the small stove in the bunkhouse, poured it into a tin cup, walked back to the cabin and set the cup on the floor outside her locked door. Then he went back to the bunkhouse. In the morning, the cup was empty. 2 weeks passed like water over stones, slow and quiet, wearing things smooth without anyone noticing. Nora woke before dawn every morning. Wyatt knew this because he could hear her through the bunkhouse walls, the creak of floorboards, the soft clank of the stove being opened, the pump handle groaning as she drew water. She moved through the cabin like someone who trained herself to take up as little space as possible. Like a woman who'd learned that being noticed was dangerous. By the time Wyatt came in from the bunkhouse each morning, coffee was made and breakfast was cooking. Nora always stood at the stove with her back to the door, always her back to the door, as though she needed to hear him come in before she could decide whether to turn around. He learned to make noise, scrape his boots on the porch step, cough, adjust his hat against the doorframe. Small sounds, deliberate. The language of a man who understood that silence could be a weapon. She noticed. He could tell because on the third morning she turned around before he was all the way through the door, turned around and looked at him and said, "Good morning." And the words came out almost steady. "Thank you," Wyatt said, sitting down to a plate of eggs and biscuits better than anything he'd cooked in 4 years. "This is real good." She nodded, sat down across from him with her own plate, picked at the food the way a bird picks at seed, taking small, careful bites. Like eating too much might be a punishable offense. Wyatt had seen that before. Not in horses, in huns. Dogs that had been starved and then fed and couldn't believe the food was really theirs and wouldn't be taken away. He ate slowly to match her pace, didn't comment on how little she took, didn't push, just sat with her in the quiet kitchen while the sun climbed over the eastern ridge and filled the room with the kind of gold light that made even a rough cabin look like something worth painting. One morning during the third week, she asked about the locked room at the end of the hall. Wyatt had been dreading this. "That was my daughter's room," he said. "Ruth. She died 4 years ago. Scarlet fever. She was 6 years old." Nora's hand stopped moving. "I'm sorry." "My wife Catherine died 3 days after. Same fever." His voice caught and he let it catch. Let it break and didn't try to seal it back together. "I kept the room exactly like it was. Her shoes by the door, her drawings on the wall, her doll on the bed. You couldn't let go." "No, I thought if I changed anything, I'd lose her." Like she'd disappear twice, Nora reached across the table, touched his hand, just her fingertips on the back of his hand, light as a leaf falling. He didn't pull away. Let her hand rest there and felt the warmth of it through the calluses and scars. "She wouldn't disappear," Nora said quietly. "People we love don't live in rooms. They live in us, in the things we do because of them." Wyatt looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he saw past the fear and the bruises and the careful armor she wore every waking moment. He saw the woman underneath. The nurse who'd held dying men's hands. The daughter who'd lost someone too young. The wife who'd survived 4 years of hell and came out bent but not broken. "You speak like someone who knows," he said. "I lost my father when I was 16. Cholera. I became a nurse because of him. Because I couldn't save him, so I saved everyone else I could." "That's why you're so good at bandaging." She pulled her hand back, looked away. "I was a nurse in Boston, before Vincent." The name hung in the air like smoke, the first time she'd said it out loud. "Vincent Dalton," she continued, her voice flat. "My husband, or he was. I don't know what the law says now. I ran without filing for divorce. Ran without anything except the clothes on my back and one thing I took from his father's study." "What did you take?" Nora stood up, walked to her room, came back carrying something wrapped in cloth, a ledger, small, leather-bound, filled with neat handwriting. "This," she said, "is 15 years of crimes written by Silas Dalton, Vincent's father, railroad baron, one of the richest men in America." She opened it to a page near the middle, pointed to an entry dated March 14th, 1872. Wyatt read, "Margaret Dalton. Problem solved. Stairs, $400 to Coroner Harris. Case closed." Margaret was Silas's first wife, Nora said. "Vincent's mother. They said she fell, but this," she tapping on the page, "this is murder, written in his own hand, along with 50 other crimes, bribes, land fraud, 5 other deaths." Wyatt looked at the ledger, then at Nora. Understanding dawned slowly, like watching the sun come up over the mountains. That's why you ran. Yes, and that's why they'll never stop looking. Because this ledger can destroy them. Everything they've built, all their money and power, it all disappears if this gets to a U.S. Marshal. Why haven't you sent it? Because I'm terrified. Because if I send it and it doesn't work, if Silas buys his way out, like he's bought his way out of everything else, then I'll have nothing left to bargain with. Nothing to keep me alive. Wyatt stood, walked to the window, looked out at his land, his 180 acres of grass and timber and creek water, the place he'd built to hide from the world. But the world had found him anyway. What do you need? When he asked. I need time. Time to find a marshal I can trust. Time to make copies. Time to, no. What do you need from me? She stared at him. You've already given me more than anyone has in 4 years. That wasn't the question. Nora's eyes filled. She blinked hard, fighting it. Don't leave me, she whispered. Everyone leaves. Everyone runs when they realize how dangerous I am to be around. My friends in Boston, the few family members I had left, they all disappeared when Vincent made it clear what would happen to people who helped me. Wyatt walked back to her, stood close enough that she could hit him if she wanted to, close enough that she could run if she needed to. I spent 4 years of my life shooting at men who wanted to kill me, he said. And I spent 16 years after that on this ranch fighting drought and wolves and claim jumpers and every other thing that tried to take what's mine. I don't run, Nora, from anything. And I pray had hell don't run from people who need help. This isn't just help. This is war. Then we'll fight it. 4 weeks after Nora arrived, Cal came riding hard up from town. Wyatt was repairing fence posts when he heard the hoofbeats. Fast. Urgent. Cal never rode that hard unless something was badly wrong. Pinkerton and Millbrook, Cal said, not bothering to dismount. His face was grim. Asking about a woman, brown hair, blue-gray eyes, around 28 years old. Might be using the name Brennan. The fence post in Wyatt's hands suddenly felt very heavy. Just one man. Aye, but the dangerous kind. Doesn't dress like a thug, speaks like a gentleman, asked his questions polite as you please. But his eyes, Cal shook his head. His eyes were doing the real talking. Wyatt looked toward the cabin. Nora was inside, probably making lunch. She'd started humming while she worked. Soft melodies she probably didn't realize he could hear. The sound of a woman beginning to feel safe enough to make noise. He didn't want to end that. God help him, he didn't want to walk through that door and watch the fragile thing they'd built shatter like glass on stone. Get her, he said. When Nora came out, she knew immediately. Maybe from Wyatt's face, maybe from Cal's, maybe from some sixth sense that trauma teaches you. The ability to smell danger on the wind. They found me, she said, not a question. Someone's asking around. Could be Pinkerton, could be hired gun. Either way, he's looking for you. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't run. She just stood there, and Wyatt watched her face go through a series of changes. Fear, resignation, then something else, something harder. I want to see him, she said. Bad idea. I'm tired of hiding, Wyatt. I hid in my marriage for 4 years, hid in my own house, made myself invisible just to survive. I'm done hiding. If someone's looking for me, let them find me. But they'll find me standing up. Wyatt studied her face, saw the determination there, the steel that had been bent but never broken. Then we go together. They rode into Millbrook at midday. The town baked under the July sun. Main Street was mostly empty. Heat shimmer rose off the dirt road, turning everything wavy at the edges. The stranger sat outside the boarding house, drinking what looked like tea from a china cup, completely out of place in this frontier town. He wore a dark vest over a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His boots were polished but not new. No visible weapons, which meant he carried at least 2 that nobody could see. When he saw them coming, he stood, set down the cup with deliberate care, watched them tie their horses to the rail. Wyatt's hand rested on the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. Cal stood to his right, positioned so he could draw if needed. But it was Nora who walked forward first. I'm told you are looking for me, she said. The stranger's eyes widened slightly, surprised. He'd expected to do the hunting, not have his prey walk up to him in broad daylight. Mrs. Dalton, he said. His accent was Scottish, educated. You're a difficult woman to find. My name is Hastings. I'm not a Dalton. I never was. The law in Philadelphia says different. The law in Montana says I'm a free woman. And if you have a problem with that, you can discuss it with my husband. The stranger's eyes shifted to Wyatt. Measured him in that way professionals measure each other. Weight stance, the way his hand rested near the rifle. Reading the violence potential. Duncan Reed, the stranger said. I work for Silas Dalton. I was hired to locate you and verify your whereabouts. Nothing more. You're Pinkerton. Former. Now I work independently, which means you have fewer rules. Duncan almost smiled. That's one way to put it. Nora stepped closer, close enough that Wyatt tensed, ready to pull her back if needed. Tell Silas I'm not coming back. Tell him I'm done. Tell him if he wants what I took, he can come get it himself. But I won't go quietly. Mrs. Hastings, Duncan's voice dropped, became almost gentle. I don't think you understand what you're dealing with. Silas Dalton is not a man who accepts no. He's not a man who lets things go. If he has to burn this entire town to get you back, he will. Then tell him to bring matches. Duncan looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Recognition, maybe. Or regret. I'll deliver your message, he said quietly. But I should tell you, in the interest of fairness, that telling Silas Dalton to come himself is the last thing you want to do. Maybe, but I'm done being afraid. They rode back to the ranch in silence. That night, Nora sat on the porch while Wyatt cleaned his rifle. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the sky the color of fresh blood. You shouldn't have done that, Wyatt said. Probably not. Now they know exactly where you are. They were going to find out eventually. At least this way I got to look that man in the eyes and tell him I'm not afraid. But you are afraid. Nora turned to him. The dying light caught her face and he saw every year of pain etched there. Terrified, every second of every day. But being afraid and being paralyzed aren't the same thing. Fear kept me alive in that marriage, but it also kept me from living. I'm done letting fear make my decisions. Wyatt set down the rifle, moved to sit beside her on the porch steps. There's a difference between brave and foolish. Is there? Because I'm not sure I know it anymore. They sat without speaking. The crickets started up their evening song. A hawk circled overhead, looking for a last meal before dark. I need to tell you something, Wyatt said, about why I put that advertisement in the paper. You don't have to. I do. He took a breath. The bank's been pressuring me to sell, not directly, but they make it clear every time I go to town. The big cattle operations want this valley. They want every small ranch bought out or driven out, and the bank they'd love to foreclose, sell to the highest bidder. But you own this land. I do, but I'm one man, no heirs, no family. When I die, the bank argues they have a claim because of loans my father took out decades ago. Loans that were paid off, but the paperwork's conveniently missing. So he paused. I needed a wife, someone who could inherit legally, someone who'd keep this place running if something happened to me. Nora was very quiet. That's why you needed a mail-order bride, not companionship, not love, legal protection for your land. That's how it started, but that's not what it is now. She turned to look at him. What is it now? Wyatt met her eyes. Now it's two people who've both lost everything trying to figure out if they can build something together. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk. I don't know how to do this, Nora said. I don't know how to trust a man who doesn't hurt me. That sounds crazy, but it's true. For 4 years, pain was how I knew Vincent was paying attention to me, and now you're here being pointed, and my brain doesn't know what to do with that. It keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe's not dropping. This is it. This is all I am. A rancher who's too stubborn to sell and too lonely to keep living alone. Nothing hidden, no surprises. Everyone has surprises. Then here's mine. I loved my wife. I loved my daughter. When they died, I wanted to die too. Came close a few times. Sat in the barn with my service revolver thinking about how easy it would be. But I didn't do it. Know why? Nora shook her head. Because Catherine made me promise. 3 days before she died, when she knew the fever was winning, she made me promise I'd keep living. Find someone. Let myself be happy again. I thought she was delirious. But now, he gestured at the ranch at the sunset at Nora. Now I think maybe she knew I'd need permission. Permission to stop mourning. Permission to let someone in. A tear ran down Nora's cheek. I'm not her. I know. And I'm not looking for her replacement. I'm looking for something new. Something neither of us has had before. What's that? A partner. Someone who stands beside me, not behind me or in front of me. Someone who's got her own battles and doesn't need me to fight them all, but knows I'll be there if she asks. Nora wiped her eyes. That sounds nice. It also sounds impossible. Most good things do. They sat as darkness fell. The stars came out one by one, then all at once, the way they do in big sky country. The temperature dropped and Nora shivered. Wyatt wanted to put his arm around her but didn't. Waited for her to ask, to give permission. She didn't ask. But after a while she moved closer, just a few inches, close enough that their shoulders touched. They sat like that until the moon rose and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled and the night folded around them like a blanket pulled up to the chin of a sleeping child. Inside the cabin, tucked between the pages of the family Bible, a ledger waited in darkness. 15 years of crimes, 5 names of the dead, and one woman's only hope for justice. Tomorrow Duncan Reed would send a telegram to Boston. Tomorrow Silas Dalton would read that his daughter-in-law refused to return. Tomorrow the wheels of revenge and pursuit would begin turning in earnest. But tonight on a porch in Montana, 2 broken people sat together in the dark and wondered if broken things could be mended into something stronger than they'd been before. Outside the circle of lamplight, Cal Brennan stood watchful from the barn rifle in hand, scanning the road for riders that hadn't come yet. But would come soon. Always came soon. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Duncan Reed had ridden out of Millbrook. Cal brought it up from town, his horse lathered from hard riding. He didn't say anything, just handed Wyatt the folded paper and waited while he read it. The words were few. The threat was clear. Dalton party arriving Millbrook Friday. Stop, 7 men stop. Vincent Dalton leading stop. Advise caution. Stop Reed. Wyatt looked up from the telegram. Cal's face was grim as a winter storm. That's 3 days from now, Cal said. I can count. 7's a lot of men. I know. We need help. Other ranchers, town folks, someone. Wyatt folded the telegram and put it in his pocket. Looked toward the cabin where Nora was probably making lunch, probably humming that song she thought nobody could hear. 3 weeks. They'd had 3 weeks of something close to peace. 3 weeks of shared meals and careful conversations. 3 weeks of Nora slowly learning to smile without looking over her shoulder first. 3 weeks of building something fragile and precious and probably doomed. We'll handle it, Wyatt said. We'll die is what we'll do. 3 against 7. Those aren't winning odds. Then we make them winning odds. Inside the cabin, Wyatt showed Nora the telegram, watched her face go pale, then hard, then something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Finally, she said. Finally. I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 3 weeks. At least now I know when it's coming. She moved to the window, looked out at the mountains, at the valley, at the land she'd started to think might be home. Vincent's drunk most days by noon, she said. Her voice was clinical, detached, the way a doctor talks about symptoms. He's mean when he's drunk, unpredictable, but he's also sloppy, makes mistakes. If we're smart, we can use that. This isn't your fight to plan. She turned. The afternoon light caught her face and Wyatt saw something there he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not resignation, determination. This stopped being just my fight the moment you decided to stand beside me. So let me do what I'm good at. Let me think like a nurse, assess the wounds, plan the treatment, figure out how to keep people alive. Wyatt looked at her, saw the woman who'd bandaged soldiers in field hospitals, who'd held dying men's hands while cannon fire shook the earth, who'd survived 4 years of marriage that should have killed her and came out knowing exactly how to read violence before it arrived. All right, he said, tell me what you see. They came on Friday just after dawn. Wyatt heard them before he saw them. The sound of multiple horses moving at walking pace, unhurried, confident, the sound of men who didn't expect resistance. 7 riders crested the ridge, morning sun behind them turning them into silhouettes, dark shapes against a red sky that looked like the earth was bleeding. Vincent Dalton rode in front. Even from 200 yards, Wyatt could see he was swaying in the saddle, drunk already or still drunk from the night before. Beside him, a man in a dark coat who sat his horse like he'd been born on one. Professional, dangerous. 5 more behind them, hired guns, the kind of men who killed for money and slept fine afterward. They stopped at the edge of Wyatt's property, just beyond rifle range. Smart. Cal appeared beside Wyatt, Winchester already in hand. Their positioning, 2 staying with the horses, 5 coming forward on foot. Let them come. Wyatt, let them come close enough to talk. We handle this peaceful if we can. And if we can't, then we handle it the other way. Nora stepped out onto the porch. Wyatt had told her to stay inside, but he'd known she wouldn't listen. She wore one of Catherine's old dresses, the only thing that fit her now that she'd started eating regular meals. In her hand, not quite hidden by her skirt, was the Colt revolver Wyatt had given her 2 weeks ago. She'd learned to shoot, practiced every evening while Wyatt pretended not to watch. She wasn't good, but she was competent, and sometimes competent was enough. Vincent saw her and shouted. The words were slurred, but the fury in them was clear. Nora, get your lying whore self down here. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Cal's hands shifted on his rifle. But Nora's voice when she spoke was steady as stone. My name is Hastings, and I'm not going anywhere. Vincent lurched forward. The man beside him, the professional, caught his arm, held him back. They had a brief, heated exchange that carried across the morning air in fragments. Vincent's voice getting louder. The other man staying calm, controlled. Finally, the professional stepped forward alone, hands visible, no weapon drawn. He stopped 30 feet from the porch, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough that Wyatt couldn't shoot him without it being murder in the eyes of anyone watching. Mr. Thornhill, the man said. His voice carried a slight southern accent. Texas, maybe, or Arkansas. My name's Jonas Kane. I'm here representing Mr. Silas Dalton of Boston. Representing how I'm authorized to make you an offer, a generous one. $500 cash money if you send Mrs. Dalton back with us. No questions, no trouble. You keep your ranch, your life, and enough money to see you through next winter. She's not Mrs. Dalton. She's Mrs. Thornhill, and she's not for sale. Jonas smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. That's the polite offer, Mr. Thornhill, but I'm also authorized to make an impolite one. I'm listening. You give her to us, or we take her, and anyone standing in the way gets buried in that nice mountain soil you got here. The morning was very quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. Wyatt stepped down from the porch, slow, deliberate. Winchester held loose in his right hand, his left hand empty and visible. Here's my offer, he said. You get on your horses. You ride back to Millbrook. You tell Silas Dalton that his daughter-in-law is staying in Montana. And if he's got a problem with that, he can send lawyers instead of guns. Jonas studied him, reading him the way you read tracks in dirt, looking for weakness, for hesitation, for any crack that could be exploited. He found none. You're a fool, Jonas said quietly, but I respect it. A man's got a right to be a fool if he chooses. He turned, walked back to where Vincent waited with the others. They had another conference. Vincent's voice rose again, sharp with drunken rage. Jonas spoke, calm, patient, the voice of a man dealing with a child throwing a tantrum. Then they mounted up and rode away. But they didn't ride far. From the ridge, maybe half a mile distant, Wyatt could see them making camp, setting up for a siege. They'd wait, starve him out, wait for him to make a mistake, wait for him to run out of water or ammunition or nerve. Cal appeared at his elbow. They're settling in. I see it. We got maybe 3 days of water, week of food if we're careful. Ammunition's good, but not good for a long fight. Wyatt didn't answer. He was watching the ridge, counting men, noting positions, doing the math that soldiers learn in war. The math that tells you when you're outnumbered and outgunned and probably going to die, but might take a few of them with you if you're smart about it. The math wasn't good. That night, long after dark, a single rider approached the cabin. Wyatt almost shot him. Had the Winchester up and aimed before Cal hissed, "Wait, that's Reed." Duncan Reed rode slowly, hands visible moonlight, turning his face silver. He stopped 50 feet out and called softly, "I'm alone, unarmed. I need to talk." Wyatt stepped onto the porch. "Talk from there. What I have to say isn't for shouting across a field." Duncan paused. "Please, 5 minutes, then I'll leave." Something in his voice made Wyatt lower the rifle. Not put it down, just lower it. "Come ahead, slow." Duncan dismounted, walked forward with his hands away from his sides, stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "I have a daughter," he said without preamble. "Her name's Lily. She's 8 years old. Lives with my sister in Denver because I travel too much for work. Her mother died when she was born. Complications. The doctor said it was nobody's fault, but I knew better. I wasn't there. Was off chasing some cattle rustler for $60. When I got back, my wife was 3 days dead, and my daughter was being nursed by a stranger." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I tell you this so you understand. I do this work because I need money, because Lily needs a good school and a good home and a future that doesn't involve her father's profession. I don't do it because I enjoy it. I don't do it because I'm evil. I do it because it's what I'm good at and it pays well. That's supposed to make me sympathetic. No, it's supposed to make you understand what I'm about to do." Duncan pulled something from his coat. A map. He unfolded it, held it where moonlight made it visible. "There's a route through the mountains. Old Cheyenne Trail. Nobody uses it anymore because it's rough and dangerous and 3 horses died on it last winter, but it cuts 60 miles off the journey to Helena. And in Helena, there's a U.S. Marshal named Samuel Bishop. He's clean, can't be bought. If you can get to him with that ledger, he'll protect you. He'll make sure Silas Dalton answers for what's in those pages." Wyatt stared at the map. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because yesterday I got a telegram from Silas. Instructions. He said when we take Mrs. Hastings, we're to make sure she has an accident on the way back. Falls from a horse maybe. Hits her head. Tragic loss. Very sad. No witnesses." The porch was very quiet. "He's going to kill her," Duncan said. "Not to punish her, to erase her, because she's the only one besides me who knows that ledger exists. And he probably has plans for me too, once this is done." "So you're saving your own skin?" "Yes, and trying to save hers. And maybe doing one decent thing before I end up like all the men I've hunted, dead in a ditch somewhere with nobody to mourn them." Nora appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening. Wyatt could see it in her face. "How do we know this isn't a trap?" she asked. Duncan looked at her, really looked at her, and Wyatt saw something shift in the man's face, something old and painful. "My wife's name was Sarah," Duncan said quietly. "She had a bruise on her wrist the day I married her. Said she'd fallen. I believed her because I wanted to, because I was young and stupid and in love. But after she died, her sister told me the truth. Sarah's father used to beat her, used to tell her she was worthless, used to say no man would want her if she didn't learn to keep her mouth shut. That's why she married me so quick. Because I was the first man who was kind to her, and she thought kind was the same as safe." He paused. His voice dropped lower. "I see the same bruises on you, Miss Hastings. Different shapes, different places, but the same story underneath. And I didn't save Sarah, but maybe I can help save you." Nora looked at Wyatt. He looked back. A whole conversation passed between them without words. Finally, Wyatt spoke. "If this is a trap, then shoot me. I'll deserve it." They left before dawn while Vincent's men were still sleeping off whiskey and fatigue. 4 horses moving quiet as ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness. Wyatt, NorCal, and Duncan. They'd argued about bringing Duncan, but his knowledge of the mountain trail was too valuable to ignore. And something in Wyatt's gut said the man was telling truth. The trail climbed immediately, steep switchbacks through pine forest, dark enough that they had to dismount and lead the horses. The only sounds were breathing and the soft crunch of pine needles under boots. By sunrise, they were 10 miles in and 2,000 feet higher. The air was thinner, colder. Nora's breath came in white puffs, and she pulled her coat tighter. "You all right?" Wyatt asked. "Cold, but I've been colder." They rode in silence. The trail narrowed, dropped off on the left side into nothing, just empty air and a 100-foot fall to rocks below. Wyatt's horse didn't like it. kept pulling toward the mountainside, away from the drop. He didn't blame the animal. His own hands were sweating inside his gloves despite the cold. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses, ate cold biscuits and jerky, drank from canteens. Duncan studied the trail ahead. This is the easy part. Tomorrow gets worse. Worse how? Cal asked. Narrower, steeper, and if the weather turns, he shook his head. We'll be exposed, no shelter for 12 miles. As if summoned by his words, the wind picked up, brought the smell of snow. The storm hit that night. They'd made camp in a shallow cave. Not much shelter, but better than nothing. Duncan built a small fire using deadfall he'd gathered on the way up. The smoke found cracks in the rock overhead pulled away by the wind. Outside, snow fell in sheets. Not the gentle Montana snow that drifts down lazy and peaceful. This was mountain snow. Mean. Driven by wind that howled like something dying. They huddled close to the fire. Not for warmth so much as light. Something to push back the darkness that pressed in from all sides. Nora sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering despite the fire. Wyatt could hear her teeth chattering. Come here, he said. She looked at him, hesitant. I'm just warm. Nothing else. I promise. She moved closer. He put his coat around her shoulders, then his arm. She tensed for just a second, old habit, old fear, then relaxed against him. Better? Yes, thank you. They sat like that while the storm raged. Cal and Duncan took turns keeping watch at the cave entrance, making sure no one followed, making sure Vincent's men hadn't somehow tracked them through the mountains. Around midnight, Nora spoke quietly. Tell me about Catherine. Wyatt was silent for a long moment. Then, she was tough, frontier tough, could shoot ride rope a steer, delivered our daughter herself when the doctor couldn't get through a blizzard. She was better than me at almost everything except being stubborn. How did you meet? Church social, 1869. I just come back from the war. Still had nightmares. Still woke up screaming some nights. She didn't care. Said everyone's broken somehow. Question is whether you let it make you bitter or whether you keep trying. She sounds wonderful. She was, and when she died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd used up my one chance at happiness. But then you stepped off that train and I realized maybe happiness isn't something you get once. Maybe it's something you build, again and again, with whoever's brave enough to build beside you. Nora turned to look at him. Her face was very close. He could see every detail. The small scar above her eyebrow, the way her eyes caught firelight and turned gold at the edges. I'm terrified, she whispered. Not of dying. I made peace with that when I ran. I'm terrified of living, of trying to be happy and having it ripped away again. Then be terrified, but do it anyway. I'll tell you, one day at a time, one choice at a time. You already made the first choice, getting on that train. Everything after that is just more choosing. She didn't answer, but she leaned against him, and after a while her shivering stopped. Outside, the storm howled on. Day 2 on the trail started bad and got worse. The snow had stopped, but it left the trail slick with ice. The horses moved carefully, testing each step. One wrong move and they'd slide right off the edge. They'd made maybe 2 miles when Nora's horse went down. It happened fast. One moment they were picking their way around a boulder. The next, the mare's rear leg slipped. She scrambled, tried to regain purchase. Failed. The horse went down hard on her side. Nora, who'd learned to ride only weeks ago, didn't roll clear fast enough. The mare landed on Nora's left arm. The sound of bone breaking carried clear in the thin air. Wyatt was off his horse before the echo faded. Cal caught Nora's mare, pulled her up. Duncan helped get Nora clear. She wasn't screaming. That was the first sign something was badly wrong. People scream when bones break. Unless the shock is so bad, they can't. Wyatt knelt beside her. Let me see. She held out her arm. It bent at an angle halfway down the forearm. Wrong angle. Bone showing through skin. Compound fracture. Duncan swore quietly. Cal looked sick, but Wyatt had seen worse. Had held friends whose legs were gone, below the knee, whose faces were half shot away, who'd lived anyway because shock is a mercy God gives to the dying and the nearly dead. We need to set it, Wyatt said. Now, before the swelling starts. I know, Nora said. Her voice was very small. I've set bones before, but never my own. Duncan pulled supplies from his pack. Clean cloth, whiskey, small straight branches that could serve as splints. This is going to hurt, Wyatt said. I know. He gave her the whiskey bottle. She drank, not a sip, a long pull that drained a quarter of the bottle. Then she bit down on a piece of leather Cal provided and nodded. Wyatt pulled. Nora's scream tore through the mountains. Birds fled from nearby trees, her back arched, every muscle rigid, but the bone went back in place. Duncan worked fast, cleaned the wound, packed it with cloth, splinted the arm, bound it tight. When it was done, Nora was pale as snow, sweating despite the cold, shaking. Can you ride? Wyatt asked. Do I have a choice? Not really. Then I can ride. They made 8 more miles that day. Slow, painful, stopping every hour to let Nora rest, to give her more whiskey, to check that the bleeding hadn't started again. By nightfall, they were within 20 miles of Helena. One more day, maybe less if they pushed hard, but Vincent's men had found their trail. Cal saw them at sunset, 4 riders, maybe 5 miles back, moving fast now that the trail was obvious. They're closing distance, Cal said. We got maybe 4 hours. Wyatt looked at Nora. She was barely conscious. Fever starting from the wound. They needed to stop, needed to rest, needed time to let her heal. They had none of those things. We ride through the night, Wyatt said. She can't. She has to. They rode through darkness that felt solid as stone, no moon, cloud cover too thick. Just the trail beneath them, and faith that the horses could see what they couldn't. Nora tied herself to her saddle, used her good arm to hold on. The bad arm hung useless at her side, and Wyatt could hear her breathing, short, sharp gasps of pain with every jolting step. Behind them, maybe 2 miles back now, they could see torches, 4 points of light moving through the darkness, getting closer. The trail descended, steep, dangerous. Wyatt's horse nearly went down twice. Cal's did go down, but the Irishman managed to roll clear, caught the reins, kept moving. Duncan led them through a series of switchbacks that seemed to go straight down the mountain face. Blind faith in the dark, trusting that the next step wouldn't be empty air. And then near midnight they saw it. Lights. Distant but real. Helena. The town spread out in the valley below like stars fallen to earth. 2 more miles, Duncan said. We're going to make it. That's when the first shot rang out. The bullet hit rock beside Wyatt's head, sprayed stone fragments into his face. Sharp, cutting. He felt blood on his cheek. His horse-reared eyes wild with fear. He fought to control it, pulling hard on the reins, speaking low. Steady. The animal's panic feeding his own. Behind them, maybe 100 yards back now, Vincent's men had stopped, dismounted, were taking aim shots, silhouettes steady against the distant glow of their torches. Another shot. This one closer. The bullet whined past Cal's ear like an angry hornet. The Irishman ducked low, made himself small on his horse. Ride, Wyatt shouted. They ran, down the mountain in the dark. Horses at full gallop on a trail meant for walking. The sound of hooves on stone like thunder. Like war drums. Like the end of everything. Madness. Suicide. The only option. More shots came. A rapid volley now. The hired guns finding their rhythm. Finding their range. Cal's horse screamed. A high, terrible sound. The animal's front legs buckled. It went down hard, tumbling forward. Cal threw himself clear just before 1,000 pounds of horseflesh hit the ground and rolled. He came up running, limping but moving. Duncan wheeled his horse around, reached down. Cal grabbed his arm. Duncan pulled, muscles straining. Cal swung up behind him. They kept moving. A bullet took Wyatt's hat clean off his head. Another ripped through his coat sleeve just above the elbow. He felt the burn of it, grazing skin. Hot, immediate. The smell of burned fabric. Nora was ahead of him, bent low over her horse's neck, moving fast, too fast. The animal was panicked, running blind, out of control. The trail curved sharp left. Nora's horse took it too wide. For one terrible moment, they were airborne. Horse-bound rider suspended over nothing, over darkness, over death. Wyatt's heart stopped. Then they hit the slope below the trail. Started sliding, 30 feet of loose scree and snow and ice. No way to stop, no way to steer. Just gravity and momentum, and the mountain taking what it wanted. Wyatt threw himself off his horse, hit the slope hard, started sliding after her, clawing at rocks, at roots, at anything. His hands tore, blood made his grip slippery. He caught her coat, fistful of fabric, held on, dug his boots in. They slid together, tumbling, the world spinning. Sky and ground and pain all mixing into one. They hit a boulder and stopped. For a moment, the only sound was breathing, hard and ragged, the taste of blood and dirt and fear. Then Nora spoke. "Are we dead?" "Not yet." Above them on the trail, voices, Vincent's men arguing about whether to follow on foot or go around, whether to risk the darkness in the slope, whether the ledger was worth dying for. Wyatt helped Nora up. Her broken arm hung at an even worse angle now. The splint had shifted, bone grinding against bone, but she was alive, moving. They scrambled down the slope, half sliding, half falling, reached flat ground, started running toward the lights of Helena, the sounds of pursuit behind them. Men on foot now, boots on stone, curses, commands, getting closer. Wyatt turned, raised his Winchester. The rifle felt heavy. His hands shook. He fired twice, not aiming to kill, aiming to slow them down. Make them think twice about the range, about the darkness, about how bad they wanted this. It worked. The pursuit hesitated, scattered, took cover. They reached the edge of town, stumbled onto Main Street. A few late-night drinkers stared from a saloon doorway. A dog barked. Someone yelled something, but the words didn't matter. And there, like Providence, stood a man with a badge. U.S. Marshal Star gleaming in lamplight. Wyatt recognized him from Duncan's description. Samuel Bishop, gray-haired, solid. The kind of man who looked like he'd never broken a law or a promise in his life. The kind who'd been doing this job so long, he could smell trouble from 3 streets away. "Marshal," Wyatt gasped, his chest heaving, blood on his face. "My name's Wyatt Thornhill. This is my wife, Nora. We need help." Behind them, Vincent's men appeared at the edge of town, saw the marshal, stopped. Bishop's hand moved to his sidearm, didn't draw, just rested there. Ready, his eyes taking in everything. The blood, the broken arm, the 4 men with guns standing in the shadows. The fear written on Nora's face like scripture. "What kind of help?" Nora, shaking, bleeding, barely conscious, pulled the ledger from inside her dress. Held it out with her good hand. The leather cover stained dark with blood. Her blood. The blood of 15 years of crimes, and the kind that puts railroad barons in prison. The marshal's office smelled of coffee and old leather and justice that moved slow but moved sure. They sat in wooden chairs while a doctor summoned from his house at midnight reset Nora's arm. She screamed again, shorter this time, hoarser, like she'd used up all her screaming and had to make do with what was left. Wyatt held her good hand, felt her grip hard enough to hurt. Let her, would have let her break every bone in his hand if it helped. Outside through the window, he could see Vincent and his men, standing in the street, arguing, Vincent gesturing wildly, drunk rage making him loud. The professional Jonas Kane shaking his head. Clearly this wasn't part of the plan. Clearly things had gone sideways. Marshal Bishop sat at his desk, reading the ledger, page after page, his face giving nothing away, just the occasional tightening around his eyes, the set of his jaw. Small signs that what he was reading was changing things, that the world was about to shift. Finally, he closed it, looked up. "This is authentic." "Yes, sir," Nora said. Her voice was thin, exhausted. "I lived in that house for 4 years. I watched Silas Dalton write in that ledger. I know his handwriting. I know his seal. Every word in there is true. You understand what you're saying? Silas Dalton is one of the richest men in America. He owns judges, senators, half the newspapers on the East Coast. I know what he owns. I also know what he's done." Bishop nodded slowly, stood, walked to the window, watched the men in the street. "That man out there, the drunk one, that's Vincent Dalton." "Yes, sir." "And he's your legal husband." Nora hesitated. Wyatt answered for her. "She's my wife, legal in Montana territory. Whatever papers Philadelphia has don't matter here. Bishop turned, studied Wyatt, reading him the way good lawmen read people, looking for the crack, the weakness. He found none. I'll need to send telegrams. Denver first, then Washington. This goes above my authority. But if what's in this ledger is true, he paused. If it's true, you just handed me the biggest case of my career. We don't care about your career, Wyatt said. We care about staying alive. Then you'll stay here, in protective custody, until I hear back from the federal prosecutor. Could be days, could be weeks. What about them? Nora nodded toward the window, toward Vincent. Them I'll handle. And Jonas Kane and his hired guns too. They're looking at accessory charges when this is done. Bishop walked out. They heard him on the street, heard his voice loud and clear in the night. You men need to move along. This is official U.S. Marshal business now. Anyone interfering will be arrested for obstruction. Vincent's voice slurred and furious. That's my wife. You got no right. I got every right, and you got about 30 seconds to get on your horses before I throw you in a cell for disturbing the peace. Silence, then the sound of horses. Riding away. Not far, just to the edge of town. Waiting, always waiting. Bishop came back inside. They'll try again, tomorrow probably, soon as they think of a legal angle. Or an illegal one they think they can get away with. I've got deputies watching. Kane and his boys won't get far. We'll pick them up at the town line, charge them as accessories. So what do? Cal asked. We wait, and we pray the law moves faster than railroad money. 3 days passed in the marshal's office. 3 days of waiting, of watching the street through barred windows, of jumping at every sound. Duncan Reed had disappeared. Slipped away that first night and hadn't been seen since. Wyatt hoped the man had made it somewhere safe. Hoped Lily would see her father again. Hoped redemption was possible, even for men who'd done bad things for money. Nora's arm healed slowly. The fever broke on the second day. By the third, she could sit up without help, could eat without nausea, could think clearly enough to tell Bishop everything. Every detail of 4 years in hell. Bishop wrote it all down, took notes in careful, neat handwriting, asked questions that made Wyatt realize the man had done this before, had built cases against powerful people, had won some and lost others, and kept trying anyway because that's what you do when you believe in something bigger than yourself. On the fourth day, the telegram came from Denver. Bishop read it twice, then looked up. Federal prosecutor is coming, should be here in 3 days. He'll review the evidence and decide whether to file charges. 3 more days, Nora asked. 3 more days. That night, Wyatt sat beside Nora on the narrow cot they'd given her. The office was dark except for one lamp turned low, shadows dancing on the walls like ghosts. Tell me something true, she said quietly. Like what? Like what happens after, when this is over? When Silas is in prison and Vincent is... She paused, couldn't finish. When it's over, we go home, back to the ranch, and we build a life. What kind of life? The kind we choose. Maybe we run cattle. Maybe we start a clinic, you're a good nurse. Maybe we just sit on that porch and watch the sun set for 50 years. Maybe all of those things, maybe none. But we choose it, together. That's what makes it worth having. She leaned against him, carefully, mindful of her broken arm. I'm so tired, Wyatt. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of being afraid. Then rest. Let me be afraid for both of us for a while. Outside in the street, horses moved in darkness. The sound of men who hadn't given up, who would never give up as long as there was money to be had and silence to be bought. But inside the marshal's office, 2 people who'd lost everything sat together in the dark and held on to each other and believed despite everything that morning would come eventually. And when it did, they'd still be standing. The federal prosecutor arrived on a Wednesday morning with 2 assistants and a reputation for never losing a case. His name was Harrison Webb, 50 years old, gray suit, gray eyes, gray hair combed back from a face that looked like it had been carved from courthouse marble. He sat across from Nora in Marshal Bishop's office and listened while she told her story for the 3rd time. When she finished, he asked one question. Are you willing to testify under oath in open court with your husband's family present, with newspapers reporting every word, with your past admired by defense lawyers who will try to make you look like a liar, a thief and a whore. Nora looked at Wyatt. He sat beside her, hand resting on the back of her chair, not touching her, just there, present, solid. She turned back to Webb. Yes, I'll testify to all of it. Every bruise, every broken bone. Every night I prayed for the courage to run or the mercy to die. I'll testify about finding that ledger in Silas Dalton's study, about reading what he did to Margaret, about realizing that if I stayed, I'd be next. I'll testify to everything, Mr. Webb, because someone has to. Webb nodded, closed his notebook, stood. Then we have a case. I'll file federal charges tomorrow. Murder, racketeering, bribery, conspiracy. Everything in that ledger and everything you have told me. Silas Dalton will be arrested within the week. What about Vincent? Wyatt asked. Accessory charges, domestic battery, maybe attempted kidnapping depending on what we can prove about the men he brought to Montana. He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. Jonas Kane and the others will likely testify against both Daltons to save themselves. After Webb left, Nora sat very still. Wyatt could see her hands shaking. It's real now, she said quietly. There's no going back. There never was. I know, but before I could have disappeared again, changed my name, run somewhere else. Now it's public. Now everyone will know. Let them know. Let the whole world know what he did to you. Let every woman in every city read about it in the newspapers and realize she's not alone, that it's not her fault, that there's a way out if she's brave enough to take it. Nora looked at him, tears running down her face now, not tears of sadness. Something else, something like relief mixed with terror, mixed with the terrible, fragile hope of someone who'd stopped believing in justice and suddenly found it standing in front of her wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. I'm so scared, she whispered. I know, but you're also the bravest person I've ever met, and you're not doing this alone. The trial began in November in Denver Federal Court. They traveled by train, Wyatt, Nora, Cal, and Marshall Bishop. 4 days on rails that cut through mountains and plains. 4 days of watching Nora's face pressed against the window, watching the land roll past, probably wondering if she'd ever see Montana again. Denver was bigger than Nora remembered, louder. The streets crowded with carriages and people and noise that never stopped. After 3 months in Montana, silence, the city felt like drowning in sound. The courthouse was granite and marble, built to look permanent, built to make people believe in something larger than themselves. Justice carved in stone. Inside the courtroom was oak and brass, high ceilings, windows that let in autumn light but somehow made everything feel colder instead of warmer. Rows of benches for spectators already filling with reporters and curious citizens and people who'd read about the case in newspapers and come to see if the rumors were true. Silas Dalton sat at the defense table, 61 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, calm as a man sitting down to breakfast. He looked at Nora once when she entered. Just once, his face showed nothing, but his eyes said, "You will pay for this." Nora didn't look away. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Harrison Webb built his case like a man laying railroad tracks. One piece at a time, each one connecting to the next, each one solid and unmovable. He called witnesses, families who'd lost land to Dalton Railroad, officials who'd taken bribes and kept records, the coroner who'd been paid $400 to call Margaret Dalton's death an accident, a former employee who'd seen Silas ordering his men to handle a problem rancher who wouldn't sell. Each testimony added weight. Each one pushed the story toward its inevitable conclusion. Then Webb called Nora. She walked to the witness stand in a blue dress that Wyatt had bought for her in Denver. Simple, modest, the dress of a woman who had nothing to hide and no reason to perform. The defense lawyer, a Boston attorney named Aldridge, who probably cost more per hour than Wyatt made in a month, stood to cross-examine. Mrs. Dalton, Hastings. My name is Eleanor Hastings. According to the marriage certificate filed in Philadelphia, your legal name is Eleanor Dalton. According to the law in Montana Territory, I'm Eleanor Thornhill. I married Wyatt Thornhill in October of this year. That marriage supersedes any previous arrangement. Aldridge smiled, cold, professional, the smile of a man about to spring a trap. Previous arrangement. Is that what you call a marriage sanctified by the church and witnessed by 200 guests? An arrangement. I call it what it was, a prison sentence served in a house with locked doors. You're saying you were held against your will. I'm saying I was beaten, burned, and broken. I'm saying I was told that if I left, I would be hunted down and killed. I'm saying that, yes, Mr. Aldridge, I was held against my will every single day for 4 years. The courtroom was very quiet. Aldridge shifted tactics. You admit to stealing property belonging to the Dalton family. This ledger you claim contains evidence of crimes. Did you have permission to take it? No. So you're a thief. If taking evidence of murder makes me a thief, then yes, I'm a thief and I'd do it again. You'd break the law again. I'd save my own life again. If that requires breaking laws written to protect men like Silas Dalton, then those laws need changing. Someone in the gallery applauded. The judge banged his gavel, but the damage was done. The moment had happened. The thing that would be quoted in every newspaper from Boston to San Francisco. Aldridge tried to recover. Mrs. Hastings, did you love Vincent Dalton when you married him? Nora paused. The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought I did. He was kind during our courtship, attentive. He brought me flowers, quoted poetry, made me laugh. I was 23 years old and my father had just died, and I was working 70 hours a week as a nurse, and here was this handsome, wealthy man telling me I'd never have to work again, telling me I'd be safe, protected, loved. She stopped, looked directly at Vincent, who sat beside his father. Vincent wouldn't meet her eyes. I loved who I thought he was, but that man didn't exist. The real Vincent showed up 3 weeks after we married, drunk at midnight, angry because dinner was cold. That's when I learned what his hands were really for. She pulled up her left sleeve, showed the scar on her forearm, the burn mark, long and deliberate. This is from a fireplace poker, heated until it glowed, held against my skin for 15 seconds while I screamed. That's love, according to Vincent Dalton. The courtroom exploded, reporters scribbling, people shouting, the judge banging his gavel again and again. When order returned, Aldridge tried one more time. But you stayed for 4 years. If it was so terrible, why didn't you leave? Nora looked at him, and for the first time Wyatt saw something in her face that wasn't fear or anger or pain. It was pity. Pity for a man who'd never been trapped, who'd never had to calculate the cost of staying against the cost of leaving, and found both answers led to death. Where would I go? My father was dead. My mother had passed when I was 12. I had no siblings, no money of my own. Vincent controlled everything. Every dollar, every friend, every door. And he told me, Mr. Aldridge, he told me every single day what would happen if I left. He'd find me. He'd drag me back. And next time he'd make sure I couldn't walk away. She leaned forward, voice dropping low, the entire courtroom leaning in to hear. So I stayed until I found that ledger, until I realized Vincent's family wasn't just cruel. They were murderers. And if I didn't run, I'd be buried next to Margaret Dalton in a grave marked accident. Aldridge started her down. He had no more questions. The next morning, Harrison Webb called a witness that shocked the courtroom. The prosecution calls Elizabeth Morrison. A woman in her late 40s walked to the stand, dark hair streaked with gray, eyes that had seen too much sorrow and learned to carry it anyway. Mrs. Morrison, Webb said, what was your relationship to Margaret Dalton? She was my sister. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Silas Dalton's face went pale. And what do you know about her death? Elizabeth's voice was steady. Years of grief hardened into steel. Margaret wrote me a letter, 2 days before she died, said Silas had threatened her, said if anything happened to her, it wasn't an accident. I tried to go to the police. They told me I was hysterical, a grieving sister seeing conspiracies where there were none. She pulled an envelope from her purse, yellowed with age, handled carefully for 15 years. This is that letter, in Margaret's handwriting, dated March 12, 1872, 2 days before she fell down the stairs. Webb took the letter, read aloud, Dearest Elizabeth, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Silas found out I know about the railroad bribes. He said women who talk too much have accidents. I'm scared. If something happens to me, don't let him get away with it. Your loving sister, Margaret. The courtroom exploded. Silas stood shouting, That's a forgery! My wife never— The judge's gavel. Mr. Dalton, sit down. Nora watched from her seat, tears streaming. She wasn't alone. Margaret had tried to warn someone, had tried to leave evidence. The chains of silence were breaking. One link at a time. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Wyatt sat beside Nora on a bench outside the courtroom, watching people pass, wondering what they saw when they looked at him, wondering if they saw a man or just a Montana rancher out of his element in the big city. When they were called back, in Nora's hand found his, squeezed hard. The foreman stood, read from a paper in a voice that shook slightly. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Margaret Dalton, we find the defendant, Silas Dalton, guilty. The word hung in the air, heavy, final. On the charges of racketeering bribery of federal officials and conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. Silas Dalton showed nothing, sat perfectly still, but Wyatt saw his hands, clenched so tight the knuckles went white, the only sign that the granite was cracking. The judge spoke. Silas Dalton, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. You will be transferred to federal prison immediately. Then he turned to Vincent. Vincent Dalton, you are sentenced to 15 years for accessory to kidnapping and domestic battery. May God have mercy on your soul. Vincent made a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, something in between. The sound of a weak man realizing his father's money couldn't buy him out of this. Marshals came forward, put Silas and Vincent in shackles, led them toward the back door where a prison wagon waited. As they passed, Silas stopped, looked at her one last time. You think you've won, he said quietly. You've just painted a target on your back for every other man who thinks his wife can do what you did. Nora stood, looked him in the eye. Good. Let them try and let their wives know there's a way out. That's more important than safety. Silas was led away. The courtroom emptied, and Nora sat back down, suddenly exhausted, and cried into her hands while Wyatt held her and Cal stood guard at the door, and outside the November sky turned the color of steel and snow began to fall. They returned to Montana the first week of December. The ranch looked smaller than Wyatt remembered, or maybe Denver had made everything else seem small. But stepping onto his own land, breathing air that smelled like pine and snow instead of coal smoke and horses, he felt something in his chest unclench. Home. The cabin was cold. They'd been gone 6 weeks. But Cal got a fire going while Wyatt brought in their bags and Nora stood in the kitchen, looking around like she couldn't quite believe it was real. We're back, she said quietly. We're back. It's really over. It's over. She turned to him. Her face was thin. The trial had taken weight from her, weight she couldn't afford to lose. But her eyes were clear. For the first time since he'd met her, truly clear. I need to show you something, she said. She walked to the bedroom, the room that had been Catherine's. That had become Nora's. That would soon be theirs if she wanted. From the dresser drawer, she pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, the paper soft from handling. I found this when I first arrived. It was in this drawer. I've been carrying it with me ever since. She handed it to Wyatt. The envelope was addressed in Catherine's handwriting to the woman who comes after me. Wyatt's hands shook as he opened it. Inside a letter, 2 pages, Catherine's neat script covering every inch. He read, Dear friend, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Wyatt has found the courage to let someone new into his heart. I am grateful for both things. Grateful that my suffering has ended. Grateful that his has a chance to. Wyatt is the best man I have ever known, but he carries wounds deeper than anyone sees. Wounds from the war, from losing his parents young, from watching me and Ruth die while he stood helpless. Those wounds make him strong. They also make him afraid. Afraid to love completely because he knows how completely loss can destroy. Be patient with him. He will try to protect you by keeping distance, by sleeping in the bunkhouse, by giving you every choice. This is not rejection. This is love from a man who has learned that love means respecting another person's freedom when it costs him. I want you to know I am not jealous. Love is not a finite resource. Wyatt loved me. He can love you. Both things are true. Both things are beautiful. Do not let my memory become a barrier between you. Let it be a bridge. Proof that he knows how to love deeply. Proof that he will fight for what matters. There is a box under the floorboards beneath the bed. Inside, you will find the deed to this property. If anything happens to Wyatt, the ranch is yours. Not the bank's, not some distant relatives. Yours. He made me promise to put this in writing before I died, and I'm trusting you to keep this secret until it's needed. Live well, sister. Love that stubborn man. Fill this house with laughter again. And when your time comes, write a letter to whoever comes after you. Keep the chain going. Love never ends. It just changes form. With all my heart, Catherine Thornhill. July 1880. Wyatt read it twice. Then a third time, his vision blurred. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. She knew, he said, his voice cracked. She knew I'd need permission. Need someone to tell me it was okay to keep living. Nora took the letter gently, folded it, put it back in the envelope. She loved you very much. And I loved her. Still do. I know. And I'm not threatened by that. Love for the dead doesn't diminish love for the living. They're different things, different shapes, both real. She placed the letter on the dresser, turned to face him. I'm not Catherine. I'll never be Catherine. But maybe I can be Nora. Maybe that's enough. Wyatt crossed the room, stood close enough to touch her but didn't. Not yet. It's more than enough. It's everything. Then ask me. Ask you what? The question you have been carrying around for 2 months. Wyatt took a breath. Eleanor Hastings, will you marry me? Not because the law says we have to, not to protect the ranch or your inheritance or any practical reason, but because I want to wake up next to you for whatever years I have left, because I want to hear you humming in the kitchen, because you make me want to be the man Catherine thought I was. Will you marry me? Nora smiled, a real smile, the first one he'd seen that reached all the way to her eyes. Yes, for all those reasons and one more. What's that? Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing. Not running, not surviving, choosing, and I choose you. They married 2 weeks later in the small church in Millbrook. No grand ceremony, no society guests, just as the minister Cal as best man, and a handful of townspeople who'd helped spread word that Nora needed support more than the speculation. Nora wore a simple white dress that the pastor's wife had sewn. Wyatt wore his only suit brushed clean of trail dust. They stood before the altar in afternoon light that came through plain windows and turned everything gold. Wyatt Thornhill, the minister said, do you take Eleanor Hastings to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, honor, and cherish in sickness and health for as long as you both shall live? I do, not because law or society expects it, but because I choose to, every day, for as long as I draw breath. Eleanor Hastings, do you take Wyatt Thornhill to be your lawfully wedded husband? Nora looked at Wyatt, saw the gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes, the scars from war and work and loss, saw everything he'd been and everything he was and everything he might become, saw the man who'd stood between her and death without hesitation, who'd given her choices instead of orders, who'd let her be afraid without making her feel weak. I do. I choose him. I choose this life. I choose me. Finally. The minister smiled. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory and by the grace of God, I pronounce you husband and wife. Wyatt, you may kiss your bride. Wyatt kissed her, gentle, careful, like she was something precious that might break if handled wrong. But Nora kissed him back harder, not broken anymore, or maybe broken but choosing to live anyway, choosing to love anyway, choosing to believe that happy endings weren't just for fairy tales. The small church erupted in applause. Cal fired his pistol in the air. Someone played a fiddle, and for one perfect moment, the world was exactly as it should be. A week after the wedding, a knock came at the ranch door. Wyatt opened it to find a young woman, maybe 16, with Duncan Reed standing behind her. Mr. Thornhill, Duncan said quietly, this is my daughter Lily. The girl had her father's eyes, serious, observant. She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Pa said you saved his life, Lily said, not just in the mountains. Before that, said you reminded him why he became a lawman in the first place, before the money made him forget. She handed the package to Nora, who'd come to the door. What is this? Nora asked, Pa's Pinkerton badge. He wants you to have it. Said he's done with hunting people. Now he's going to help them. The way you helped him remember who he wanted to be. Duncan's voice was rough. I've taken a job with the U.S. Marshal Service, finding missing children, bringing them home. Lily's coming with me. We're going to do good work. Real work. He met Wyatt's eyes. You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. Figure I should pass that along. After they left, Nora opened the package. Inside, Duncan's old Pinkerton badge, and beneath it a note in his neat handwriting. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose differently. DRR. Nora pinned the badge to the inside of her medicine bag, a reminder that redemption is always possible. 8 years passed, not easily, not without struggle, but they passed, and the passing was full of life. The first year brought a son, Daniel named after Wyatt's father. He had Wyatt's eyes and Nora's stubborn streak and lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. The second year brought a daughter, Catherine Eleanor, called Cat by everyone, dark-haired and fierce and already showing signs of her grandmother's healing hands. The ranch grew. Wyatt bought the adjacent property when the owner retired, added 80 acres, built a proper barn, hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Nora opened a clinic in town, small, free for those who couldn't pay. She taught other women basic nursing, showed them how to set bones, treat fevers, recognize when a situation needed a doctor versus when it just needed time and care. Women came from 3 counties over, some for medical help, some just to talk, to sit with someone who understood what it meant to survive. The 6th year brought news from the East. 2 letters arrived the same week, both from federal prison. The first announced Vincent's death. Pneumonia, quick. Merciful in a way he'd never been to others. Nora read it once, felt nothing, not relief, not sadness, just the hollow absence where fear used to live. She burned the letter in the fireplace. The second letter was thicker, addressed to both her and Wyatt. The handwriting was shaky, old, the writing of a man whose hands no longer worked right. It was from Silas. Wyatt read it aloud while Nora stood by the window watching their children play in the yard. Mrs. Thornhill. Thornhill. My son is dead. My empire is gone. I am 70 years old and will die in this cell. I do not write to ask forgiveness. That would be an insult to the lives I destroyed. I write because yesterday the guard brought me a newspaper. In it, an article about your clinic, Mrs. Thornhill, how you teach women to recognize the signs of abuse, how you help them escape. 17 women this year alone, 17 women who might have died like Margaret, like you nearly did. I cannot undo what I did. But perhaps you are undoing it, one saved life at a time. That is not redemption, but it is something. My lawyer will contact you. I've arranged for my remaining assets what the government hasn't seized to go to your clinic. Not much, but enough to help a few more women run. Call it what you want. Guilt, restitution, the last desperate act of a dying man trying to buy his way into a heaven he doesn't believe in. But use it. Let something good come from all this evil. I am sorry, those words mean nothing, but they are all I have left to give. Silas Dalton. Nora was quiet for a long time. Do we take it? Wyatt asked. Yes, because those 17 women don't care where the money comes from. They only care that they get out alive. She folded the letter, put it in the same drawer as Catherine's. Some doors close, some open, but the women keep coming, and we keep helping them run. Silas died in 1891 of a stroke, alone, without visitors, without anyone to mourn him. The newspapers ran small obituaries mentioning his business empire. None mentioned his crimes. Time has a way of sanitizing monsters once they're safely dead. By the 8th year, 1892, Thornhill Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. Not the biggest, but solid, respected, the kind of place people pointed to and said, that's how you build something that lasts. Summer evening, August 1892, the porch of the main house. Wyatt sat in his rocking chair, now 47 years old, gray spreading through his hair like frost, hands scarred from decades of work, but his back was straight, his eyes clear. He was alive in ways that had nothing to do with heartbeat. Nora sat beside him, 36 years old now. nursing their youngest. Margaret Rose, just 6 months old, dark hair, blue eyes, loud. Daniel, 7 years old, and Catherine, 6, played in the yard with Cal's boys. Their laughter cut through the evening air like music. "Tell us a story, Pa," Daniel called on. "Tell us how you met Ma." Wyatt looked at Nora. She smiled, a private smile, the kind that held 8 years of memories and struggles and small victories. "Come here, then." The children gathered, 5 in total, Daniel and Catherine and little Margaret, Cal's boys, Thomas and Patrick. They settled on the porch steps like birds on a wire. "How did I meet your mother? Well, I put an advertisement in a Boston newspaper. Said I was looking for a wife. Strong woman, hard worker, someone who wanted a fresh start in Montana territory." "Was Ma strong?" Catherine asked. "Strongest person I ever met. Still is." "Tell them the truth," Nora said quietly. "They're old enough." Wyatt hesitated, then nodded. "Children should know the truth, should learn that strength comes from surviving, not from never being hurt. Your mother came to me running from a man who hurt her, who made her afraid to live. She got on a train with nothing but a bus and a secret and more courage than any soldier I fought beside in the war." "What secret?" Daniel asked. "A book, a ledger that had evidence of crimes, evidence that put that bad man and his father in prison. Your mother did that. She stood up in a courtroom and told the truth even though it was scary. Even though people tried to make her feel ashamed, she told it anyway. And because of her, other women learned they could tell their truth too." Catherine looked at Nora with new eyes. Hero worship. The kind children give when they realize their parents are more than just parents. "Were you scared, Ma?" she asked. "Terrified, every day. But your father taught me something important." "What?" "That being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." The children absorbed this, serious for a moment. Then Thomas, Cal's eldest, broke the spell. "Can we have pie now?" Everyone laughed. The moment passed. The children ran inside for dessert. Nora followed, carrying Margaret. Wyatt sat alone on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Same mountains he'd watched for 24 years now. Same sky, same land. But everything else had changed. The emptiness had filled. The silence had been replaced with laughter. The ghost had finally rested. Cal joined him. Brought 2 glasses of whiskey. "To surviving," Cal said, raising his glass. "To living," Wyatt corrected. They drank, sat in companionable silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling, that exists between men who fought together, bled together, built something together that would outlast them both. "You ever regret it?" Cal asked. "Putting that advertisement in the paper, whole thing damn near got us killed." Wyatt thought about it, honest consideration, not reflex. "No, because being safe isn't the same as being alive. I was safe before Nora came. I was also half dead. She reminded me what living feels like, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "You're a fool, Wyatt Thornhill." "Probably, but I'm a happy fool. That counts for something." They finished their drinks. The sky turned from gold to copper to the deep purple that comes just before true dark. Stars began appearing, one by one at first, then suddenly the whole sky full of them, like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. Inside, through the open windows, Wyatt could hear Nora singing to Margaret. Some lullaby her own mother probably sang to her before cholera took her too young. The chain continuing, love passing from one generation to the next, never ending, just changing form. 30 years later, winter, 1922. An old man sat in a chair by a fire in a house that had grown and changed but still stood on the same foundation. Wyatt Thornhill, 77 years old, white-haired, bent with arthritis, hands that shook when he tried to hold a pen, but his mind was clear, his memory sharp. He remembered everything. Catherine called Kat, sat beside him, taking dictation. She was 36 now, a nurse like her mother had been, running a clinic in Helena that served half the state. She'd come home to help her father write his memoir, the story he had been putting off for years. "Tell me about the promise," Kat said. "The one you made Ma." Wyatt stared into the fire, remembered. "I promised her she was safe, that no one would hurt her again as long as I drew breath. I kept that promise for 38 years. Until last winter when pneumonia took her. She died in our bed, in my arms, peaceful. That's all anyone can ask for. A peaceful end. His voice cracked. Kat took his hand. What did she say? At the end, she said, "Thank you for choosing me." Those were her last words. "Thank you for choosing me." Like I'd done her some favor. Like she hadn't saved me just as much as I saved her. Maybe more. He wiped his eyes. Continued. People ask what makes a man. They think it's about what you own, how much land, how strong you are, how many fights you've won. They're wrong. A man is measured by the promises he keeps when it's easier to break them, when keeping them costs everything. That's what separates men from boys. The promises. What promises did you keep, Pa? I promised your mother she'd be safe. I promised Catherine, your namesake, my first wife, that I'd keep living, keep loving, not bury myself with her and Ruth. I promised Cal that brothers stand together, and we did, for 40 years, until his heart gave out last spring. He paused, stared into the fire like he could see faces there. Ghosts, memories, the accumulated weight of a long life fully lived. But the biggest promise was the one I made to myself after the war, after Catherine and Ruth died. After I spent 4 years talking to an empty house, I promised that if I got one more chance at happiness, I wouldn't waste it. Wouldn't let fear or grief or pride keep me from it. And when your mother stepped off that train, scared and broken and beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with her face, I knew. That was my chance, my last stand against loneliness and bitterness and giving up. So I took it, and I never regretted it, not once. Kat wrote it all down, every word, making sure the story would survive when he couldn't. The ranch, she asked, what happens to it? You and Daniel split it, or sell it, or turn it into something new. I don't care. Land is just land. It's what you do on it that matters. Your mother and I, we built more than a ranch here. We built a refuge, a place where people could come and know they were safe. Keep that going however you can. That's my last request. Not an order, a request. We will, Pa. I know you will. You're your mother's daughter. You've got her strength, her stubbornness, her refusal to accept that things have to stay broken just because they were broken before. He leaned back, closed his eyes, tired, so tired, but at peace. One more thing for the book, he said. Write this down exactly. This is for people who come after, people who think their lives are over because of what happened to them, people who think damaged means worthless. Kat's pen was ready. Wyatt spoke slowly, choosing each word. This is for everyone who thinks they're too broken to be loved, too scared to try, too old to start over. You're not. You're just at the beginning of Act 2. The first act taught you what you needed to know. The second act is where you use it, where you take all that pain and turn it into something worth having. Love, family, a home built on promises kept instead of broken. It's not easy. Nothing worth having is. But it's possible. I'm proof your mother was proof. Every day we woke up and chose each other, we were proof, so choose. Keep choosing. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's the only real freedom anyone ever has, the freedom to choose what happens next. He opened his eyes, looked at Kat. That's enough for today. I'm tired. Rest, Pa. He closed his eyes. The fire crackled. The house was warm. Outside snow fell over the land he'd worked for 54 years. The land that had been his sanctuary, his prison, his battlefield, and finally his home. Wyatt Thornhill died 2 weeks later in his sleep. Peaceful, no pain, just a long life finally reaching its natural end. They buried him beside Nora on a hill overlooking the ranch. Kat and Daniel and Margaret Rose and 27 grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood in the cold February wind and sang hymns and told stories about a man who'd kept his promises. The ranch continued, changed hands, became a women's shelter in the 1940s, a healing retreat in the 1980s, a museum in 2015 dedicated to domestic violence survivors and the people who helped them escape. The original cabin still stands, preserved, protected. Visitors can walk through it, see the bedroom where Nora first slept behind a locked door, see the porch where she and Wyatt sat through countless evenings slowly learning to trust again, See the kitchen where she learned to hum without fear. On the wall framed hangs Catherine's letter. To the woman who comes after me. Beside it, a copy of the ledger that brought down a railroad baron. Beside that, a photograph. Wyatt and Nora, 1892, standing on their porch, arms around each other, smiling, free. And beneath the photograph, words carved in wood, here stood two broken people who chose to build something beautiful. May their story remind us that endings can become beginnings, that safety can become love, that surviving can become living, and that the last stand is often just the first step toward home. The visitors come, thousands every year, men and women and children, some running from their own Vincents, some helping others run, some just curious about a story that refuses to die because it was true, and truth has a weight that fiction never will. They stand in that cabin, touch those walls, feel the history soaked into the wood. And some of them, not all, but some walk out believing that maybe, just maybe, their story isn't over yet. Maybe there's still time to choose. Maybe there's still time to keep one last promise to themselves. Maybe there's still time to stand their ground and call it home. The mountains watch, the creek runs, the land endures. And somewhere in the space between memory and myth, two voices whisper across more than a century, "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for proving that broken things, when placed together carefully, can become stronger than they ever were whole."